Good evening, everyone, and welcome. My name is Kimberly Begg. I am the president of the Claire Booth Luce Center for Conservative Women. We are a nonprofit organization that specializes in the conservative outreach, education, and mentorship of young women for the purpose of preparing and promoting conservative women leaders. We are thrilled by the enthusiastic response to today's event. We have a lot of new faces here today, so thank you so much for coming. We have a fantastic event for you. We have Austin Ruse speaking tonight. We will give Austin a proper introduction in just a few minutes, but for those of you who have never heard Austin speak before, let me tell you, you are in for a treat. He is a fantastic speaker, and it really is an honor to have him here. So I think that you will enjoy what he has to say. Before we start, a few notes. I would like to say thank you to two very dear friends and President's Club members, Nick and Sonia DiCarlo, who sponsored this event tonight. We are so just grateful for their support and everything that they do to make our work possible here. We also have some special guests who are with us tonight. We have President Club members, Austin and Kathy Ruse. Mike and May Hardiman. Where are you, Mike, May? Barbara Coward and John Hibble. We also have Julie Gunlock, who is with us tonight. Julie is a host on WMAL and a wonderful, fearless advocate for conservative ideas. So thank you, Julie, for being here. One of our favorite guests at the center, Stella Morabito, is here. If you're not familiar with Stella's work, I suggest that you check out our YouTube channel and our new podcast called Gen Z Unplugged. Stella is a recent guest on our new podcast, and she has a fantastic presentation on our YouTube channel that she gave here about a year ago on the weaponization of loneliness. So I encourage you to check that out. We also have very special guests, our 10 summer interns who are here with us. Our interns are on week 8, hard to believe, of their 10-week internship. They have already had media training. They've done a writing workshop. They've done a self-defense class. Next week, they're doing firearms training. They're going to be attending Young America's Foundation's week-long National Conservative Student Conference. We are all going to be so very sad when they leave us. It's been such a pleasure to have them here. But I want to say thank you very much to all 10 of you, your young women, for spending your summer with us. So thank you so very much. And now my colleague, Catherine Hendershot, has asked me to share with all of you that we are going to be in Scottsdale, Arizona, this year for our College Women's Summit. And while there will be a lot of college women at our summit, it is also open to members of our President's Club. So we're really excited the opportunity to have supporters from across the country who make it possible for the young women to go through our programs together in friendship, in camaraderie with other conservatives, and to meet the young women they are supporting. So those of you who are already President's Club members, please consider joining us in Scottsdale. The event is in October. And those of you who might be considering joining President's Club, it will be a very neat opportunity to spend time with like-minded friends. Now, it is my great pleasure to welcome up Lucy Ruse to the podium. Lucy Ruse is a rising sophomore at the University of Dallas, and she is the daughter of tonight's speaker. So please join me in welcoming Lucy Ruse.
Hello, yes, I'm Lucy Ruse, an intern at the Claire Booth Luce Center, and tonight I am so honored to introduce my father, Austin Ruse. Austin began his successful career in the magazine world in New York City, advancing to senior levels at prominent publications such as Fortune, Forbes, The Atlantic Monthly, and even Rolling Stone. After his religious and political conversion, he volunteered his time with a Catholic priest in New York until 1997, becoming one of the first employees of CFAM, a pro-life lobbying group at the UN. My father quickly rose to the office of president at CFAM and has held that position since the year 2000. My father is a dedicated writer, having published 4 books and more than 1,000 columns and essays for news sites such as Crisis Magazine, First Things, The Washington Times, National Review Online, The Weekly Standard, Human Events, and Touchstone, as well as for newspapers around the world. He is also a columnist for The Catholic Thing and a founder of the foreign affairs blog, The New Sovereigntists. Austin Ruse has lectured all over the world, in Canada, Latin America, the Far East, and Europe. He has had hundreds of interviews and podcasts, and he is a former foreign affairs commentator for EWTN's weekly news broadcast, the world over. He has also appeared on various news programs, including CNN, CBS News, MSNBC, and Fox News. My father is a Knight in the Sovereign Military Order of Malta, a founding member of the Diplomatic Society of St. Gabriel, a member of the Fellowship of Catholic Scholars, as well as a member of the Society of Catholic Social Scientists and the Sons of the American Revolution. He is also the founder of National Catholic Prayer Breakfast. He received an honorary doctorate from Franciscan University of Steubenville and numerous awards for his work. He is in the Legatus John Cardinal O'Connor Pro-Life Hall of Fame and has received the Eagle Forum Leadership Award, Students for Life of American Defender of Life Award, and many, many, many more. However, I'm sure we all know what his crowning achievement was. My father earned a Bachelor of Arts degree in Political Science and a Bachelor of Journalism degree from the University of Missouri, and is married to my mother, Kathy Ruse, former Chief Counsel to the U.S. House of Representatives Subcommittee on the Constitution, and now a specialist of dyslexic therapy. Austin and Kathy, yes, please. Austin and Kathy have 2 daughters, me and my little sister Gigi. We live in Virginia, where our family first colonized from England in the early 1700s. With that said, please join me in giving a warm welcome to my father, Austin Ruse.
Perhaps my crowning achievement is something else, and I'm going to have my daughter read a paragraph from the Wikipedia article on cheese fries.
At the top? Okay. The origin of the dish is not known. Cheese fries have been said to have grown in popularity in the United States after canned cheese products such as Cheese Whiz were introduced in 1952. Don A. Jenkins is said to have invented the chili cheese fries variation at the age of 16 in Tomball, Texas. Another report claims that a young fry cook named Austin Ruse was the first to serve this dish while working at Dairy Queen in St. Charles, Missouri.
Thank you all, and you're welcome. I'm going to tell a little story about this child right here, and I'm going to take off my jacket because it's really hot in here. Kathy Ruse and I, Kathy Cleaver and I, were late vocations to marriage. I was 49 and Kathy was, I was 47 and Kathy was 39. And we got married in 2003. And in the first year of our marriage, we had 3 miscarriages. And because I'm from St. Louis, then Archbishop of St. Louis, Raymond Burke, got in touch with me, and he said, he'd heard about this in the Pro-Life Jungle Drums, and he said, get in touch with me. Next time you're home for Christmas, come and see me. So Kathy and I went to see Archbishop Burke, and we went into his residence, and he came in and he said, kneel down. And he blessed us with a piece of John Amola's wedding dress. And he said at that moment, he said, I've done this 8 times, and it's worked 8 times. And what we did not know, oh no, I always get teary. What we did not know is at that moment, Kathy was 2 weeks along with this person. And this person did not miscarry, as you can see. So thank you, Lucy, for sticking around. Kimberly, thank you for having me here. I'm really grateful. I love the work that you guys are doing. I love these interns. You know, you really are inspirational to me and my colleagues. Seriously, you give us hope. Um, yeah. What CFAM has done over the years is lobby the United Nations on life and family issues. And we spend our days whispering into the ears of UN diplomats and assisting them in the negotiation of documents. What we have achieved over the years, not by ourselves, but we're really the only full-time, since 1997, group of pro-life NGOs at the United Nations. We've blocked a global right to abortion. We have blocked attempts by the UN to redefine the family. We have blocked their efforts to include sexual orientation and gender identity as new categories of non-discrimination in international law. And we have done this, you know, because we're motivated by our faith, but also by certain larger issues. And that's what I'm going to talk to you about tonight. You know, I did not know in 1997 anything about the United Nations. It was quite a remarkable thing. I was volunteering for a Catholic priest, and one day after Mass on Sunday, this young lady was there. Why are you here? We raised money in Canada to open up a pro-life lobbying group at the United Nations. And I swear to you, I heard bells ringing. And I said to Kristen McEachern, I said, that job is mine. And about 6 weeks later, it was. And so that's what we do. We were founded very much because of John Paul II. You know, during a series of Wednesday audiences in 1994, he asked for people of faith to drop what they were doing, raise money, go to Cairo, Egypt, and assist the Holy See in negotiating a document. You know, and like 700 people responded to that call. They raised their own money. You know, they went there on their own. They'd never met a UN diplomat. They'd never seen a UN document. And they helped the Holy See block a global right to abortion at that conference. And then everybody went home. And then the next year was the Beijing Women's Conference. And JP2 said, I need you again. And several hundred people responded. And there they blocked a global right to abortion again. And so the Holy See then said, you know, there needs to be an office, a full-time office of laymen working on these issues all the time at the UN. And so a woman named Teresa Bell raised the money in Canada, and her lieutenant came down to New York City. And I happened to meet her in this providential moment that utterly changed my life. And so from that moment on, I've done nothing else except work on UN issues, and my staff also. It is the most remarkable staff. Most of my staff have been with me at least 12 years. They are global experts on UN documents. Most UN diplomats, they come for 3 years and then they go home. And when they arrive, they don't know all of these crazy ideas and language. And so what we do is we help them understand. We are an institutional memory for all of these debates and all of these types of language that they use to impose their global vision, which is what I'm going to talk about tonight. We have gotten involved in certain larger issues of international law and geopolitics. And so that's what I'm going to talk about tonight. For as long as I've been doing this work at the UN, going on 28 years now, I have witnessed an interesting push and pull, usually pitting governments of the developing world against others from Europe and from the European Union as a body. And it has been over the question of national sovereignty. Those from the developing world often insist on national sovereignty language and documents under negotiation, not all the time, but frequently, while the Europeans have resisted them strenuously almost every single time. The Europeans see this national sovereignty language as a way governments can sidestep what they see as global agreements at the international level. So they negotiate a document and there's national sovereignty language in there. And so developing world countries say, well, we can interpret this the way that we want to at the national level. And the Europeans say, no, you can't. The developing world sees this language as a way national decision makers can protect their prerogatives, especially on the most controversial issues. And these controversial issues from the very beginning have mostly been about what they call reproductive health and reproductive rights. Over the years, we at CFAM have watched and attempted to stop the imposition of certain ideas and ideologies on the nations of the world. We have seen these ideas pushed from the European Union, the United Nations agencies of the United States government, even when there's good guys in the White House, also rich and powerful foundations and NGOs from the West. We have seen these often harmful ideas pushed on traditional peoples around the world. One of the examples I like the best to explain this process is that a couple of decades ago, when the government of Nicaragua, and I want to underline, it was the Sandinistas, when the government of the Sandinistas in Nicaragua was ordered by a UN treaty monitoring body, I'll get to that in a second, to change its definition of gender. All right? Nicaragua was ordered to change the definition of gender to a social construct. That is to say, something not based in nature. That is something that is created by man and not something that is inborn. Nicaragua, these were the Sandinistas, said no. Nicaragua's been quite good on the life issues at the UN over the years. I know that we have such strange bedfellows at the United Nations, Nicaragua among them. Several Nordic donor countries then threatened Nicaragua with losing hundreds of millions of dollars in disaster relief. And Nicaragua had just been hit by Hurricane Mitch and they needed the money. But still, Nicaragua said no. Understand that the definition of gender in international law does not include the words social construct. Yet the Nordic countries were quite willing to ignore this in order to coerce the acceptance of gender ideology. Now, hold on to the notion of coercion as I move forward in this talk. We know other instances where nations of a particular ideology have attempted to coerce their views onto smaller countries. Consider, President Obama actually canceled military operations with the government of Uganda when years ago Uganda passed laws with regard to homosexuality, which we didn't agree with all the way, but I mean, still it was their sovereign right to have these types of laws. And President Obama canceled military operations because of them. Pull back a little bit further and examine the pronouncements of UN treaty monitoring bodies. Whenever the UN initiates a human rights treaty, attached to it is a treaty monitoring body before which governments must appear every couple of years and explain how they're implementing the treaty. These bodies have no power except to take on the report and then comment. Consider first that UN treaties are negotiated and ratified by sovereign states. It is extraordinary that these hard law documents, though as we know hardly enforceable, are handed over to committees that examine compliance. And we see these committees taking hard-fought treaty language and changing it as they see fit, and then telling sovereign states that they have a treaty obligation to adhere to the new language. Now, what do I mean by that? The Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women is silent on abortion. It doesn't even mention reproductive health or reproductive rights. Yet the treaty monitoring body attached to the treaty says the treaty now requires governments to legalize abortion. Some years ago, one of the treaty monitoring bodies, on the one on the Convention on the Rights of the Child, told the Holy See, the Catholic Church, that to adhere properly to the treaty, the church would have to change her teachings on abortion and contraception. Now, abortion and contraception are nowhere in the Convention on the Rights of the Child. Yet the treaty monitoring body said it has interpreted it thusly. Consider other offices and agencies of the UN. Consider that gender has been defined twice in UN documents, and pro-life NGOs have played a role in both of these negotiations where there is a good definition of gender. This may shock you. First, in the non-binding document produced at the 1995 Beijing Conference on Women. One of the first books on gender was by Dale O'Leary, called The Gender Agenda, which I guess is out of print, but it was the first and really wonderful. The 1995 Beijing Conference on Women, where it was decided that gender is to be understood as it has traditionally been understood. Isn't that amazing? This was a global conference of sovereign states that decided this. And then a few years later, in the Rome Statutes, a hard law treaty establishing the International Criminal Court, the definition is men and women in the context of society. Does that sound like anything that you hear on MSNBC or from the Democrats in the Senate or anybody in a university? In neither case and in no other instances is gender defined by bodies of member states as a social construct, which is what the UN was telling Nicaragua. And yet, the Office of Gender Advisor to the Secretary General, now a part of a big billion-dollar agency, has defined gender as a social construct. So what happens is we negotiate documents furiously, produce a document, and then the UN does exactly what it wants to. I mean, not the UN agencies. Do you see what is happening here? There is an ideology in charge, an ideology that is more powerful than any single member state, including the United States, and more powerful than broad coalitions of UN member states. But more than an ideology, there is a system at work, and it goes by the name of empire. I will digress briefly that there has been considerable resistance to the UN here in the United States. As a young boy back in the 1960s, we used to go and knock on doors with a little orange box collecting money for UNICEF, you know, when you get candy with money for UNICEF. And more than once, doors were slammed in my face by grumpy old men telling me that the UN was communist. And it turns out they were right. And now I'm the grumpy old man. There has been great conspiracy talk in the United States about the UN as a precursor to one world government. We do not hear much about one world government any longer, but we do hear about global governance, a lattice of agreements originating from the UN and the EU that all governments must adhere to. This lattice already includes global bodies like the World Health Organization and also a myriad of agreements, including the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, the Convention on the Rights of the Child, the International Criminal Court, and even non-binding documents produced at the 1994 Cairo Conference and the 1995 Beijing Women's Conference. It was national sovereignty language at these and other conferences that governments use to protect themselves. And so, at least according to the global left, national sovereignty is now a dirty word, on par with white supremacy, racism, and Nazism. Some years ago, in our mission statement, my organization mentioned defending national sovereignty. We were being considered at that time to lecture at Columbia University, but then they saw our mission statement and said that we defended national sovereignty and we were not invited, because to them and many others, national sovereignty can only mean one thing: a desire to commit human rights violations with impunity. Some years ago, Harold Koh, a name you probably don't know, was appointed the chief lawyer for then President Obama's Department of State. A very accomplished and influential man, Koh had been dean of the Yale Law School, one of the most prestigious in the world. Koh famously said that sovereignty does not exist any longer. Only insofar as a country has ratified all existing UN documents can the country said to have national sovereignty. Of course, this turns sovereignty on its head because it is sovereignty that allows a state to say no to all UN documents and treaties. But to them, you cannot have national sovereignty until you give it away to international bodies. In 1992, former Time magazine editor and Obama diplomat Strobe Talbot said, quote, "The nation state, as we know it, would become obsolete by the 21st century, and that all states will recognize a single global authority." 3 years later, a Japanese management consultant wrote a book called The End of the Nation State, in which he said, "Nations have already lost their role as meaningful units of participation in the global economy of today's borderless world." A French diplomat wrote that nation states had been bypassed by transnational games. It should be pointed out that when disaster strikes, it is not global companies like Google, Facebook, Apple, JP Morgan Chase, or even the United Nations that come to the rescue. When disaster strikes, they look to those nation states with big ships and big planes and big strong men, mostly the United States. But the point is well taken that there are international non-state entities that can exert tremendous and even crippling power over sovereign states. What I'm talking about today is empire, and of a particular kind. Even Pope Francis used to use the phrase ideological colonialism. He used it at the UN. We have heard this term used by Catholic bishops from Africa. For many years, we at CFAM have used the term sexual colonialism. By this, the Pope, the African bishops, and we at CFAM mean the imposition of the sexual revolution by Western actors, government, non-government, not just on the developing world, but on the whole world. It is regrettable that many powerful people in the United States want the developing world to follow our path. From 2011 to 2021, sexually transmitted diseases increased by 42%. Syphilis alone jumped by 30% between 2020 and 2021. Pornography addiction is rampant. A few years ago, UNICEF actually issued a report that said that pornography was good for kids. They really did. They pulled the report after we reported and drew lots of attention to it. And so let's not just consider ideological colonialism or sexual colonialism, but colonialism generally, and even more accurately, let us consider the word empire, because there is something going on here, going on here than merely trying to convince nations of certain ideas. With very few exceptions, the history of the world is the history of empire. From early recorded history, imperial masters have been sincere in their belief that peace and prosperity can be achieved and can expand only if mankind is united as much as possible under a political regime, usually under the sword. This would be the same whether you consider the Egyptian pharaohs, the Babylonian kings, the Roman emperors, or the emperors of the Holy Roman Empire. Something new happened, however, in 1648. That year saw the end to the 30 Years' War that pitted Sweden, Denmark, the Dutch Republic, and France against the Habsburg Empire. The Habsburgs. I mean, we really love the Habsburgs. In addition, the Habsburgs in Spain had been fighting an 80 Years' War against the independence of the Dutch Republic. All this ended with the treaties signed in 1648 that ushered in what came to be known as the Westphalian system, based on the concept of Westphalian sovereignty, the theory of international law that says that each nation state has exclusive sovereignty over its own territory. The UN Charter can be seen in the light of Westphalian sovereignty. History demonstrates that this Westphalian system did not cure any nation of the hunger for colonies and even empire. After all, you can see in my bio, my Ruse ancestors came to the Virginia colony from England less than 100 years after the Treaty of Westphalia. When they arrived, they may have met my Balch ancestors, who arrived at Plymouth 3 years after the Mayflower. The Dutch were here too, so were the French, so were the Spanish. Even so, the Treaty of Westphalia did help to establish the notion that, in the words of scholar Yoram Hazony, the world is governed best when nations are able to chart their own independent course, cultivating their own traditions and pursuing their own interests without interference. This is opposed to imperialism, which seeks to bring peace and prosperity to the world by uniting mankind as much as possible under a single political regime. In the beginning of the 20th century, we still saw a world of independent states, and at the same time, we saw aggressive colonization. The British were everywhere. We see the Belgians in Africa, and with eyes for many more conquests, the French and the Germans wanted more and more. And then we saw the retreat of the British Empire and the rise of the Soviet Empire. We also saw what appeared to be growing imperial aspirations of the United States. Did you all know that in 1899, there was a national debate about who we would be as a nation? Would we be a republic or would we be an empire? This was a genuine national debate. Many were involved, but it is interesting to note that on one side, calling for a republic, was Mark Twain. He traveled the country speaking against the imperial ambitions of Teddy Roosevelt, who led the fight for empire. The questions were, do we annex Hawaii? We did. Do we invade Cuba and charge up San Juan Hill and kick out the Spanish? We did. Do we take over the Philippines? We did. Republic lost and empire won, which is what many people say. Many Americans have tended to view our country as something of a universal nation. American imperial ambitions concerning territory have been quite limited. We have not sent in anything like the British East India Company to actually run countries. But American interest in keeping the sea lanes and the foreign markets open has been a critical component of American foreign policy since our founding. The U.S. only reluctantly got involved in the First World War, which many argue was caused by the imperial ambitions of Germany, the imperial ambitions of France, Britain, and Russia. The U.S. only reluctantly got involved in the Second World War, which was caused by the imperial ambitions of Germany. During the Cold War, the United States projected power all across the globe, and this can be seen as an aspect of empire. Americans would say that our global ambitions have never been about territory, but about certain universal values, including freedom and democracy. Until the Cold War, there was a fairly spirited debate in the United States over our involvement in the world, a debate that pitted the so-called isolationists versus the internationalists of various persuasions. That debate largely ended with the rise of the Soviet threat. Until 1972, the two parties were fairly united in the fight against global communism. Indeed, both Democrats and Republicans have supported U.S. intervention into the domestic affairs of countries all over the world, though we have done so for what our leaders and what we have tended to believe were benevolent reasons. Some have maintained the isolationist cause, but for the most part, both parties have supported an internationalist agenda that places the United States as the leader of the world, and you see this now. This became ever clearer with the end of the Cold War. At that time, many in the United States wanted us to push our advantage. Foreign policy thinker Max Boot called outright for American empire. Influential neoconservative Charles Krauthammer, whom we miss, published an essay entitled Universal Dominion Toward a Unipolar World, in which he called for a confederated West to become a super sovereign that would lead a global democratic crusade to every corner of the globe. Krauthammer insisted that his project was not imperialistic because it did not seek territory, but the voluntary acceptance of new norms. Instead, Krauthammer and those like him used phrases that you will recognize: New World Order, globalization, pooled sovereignty, global governance, and many others. But the meaning was clear. There was a hegemon at the center, and if you want your people to be happy, you will go along, or there will be consequences. Granted, Krauthammer was writing in the shadow of the Cold War when it was not entirely clear what would happen next. But note his insistence that all nations be the same, that there be no difference in how countries are governed. To join this new world order, nations must adhere to what Western elites believe to be not just the best way to proceed, but the only way. This is empire. This is the proposition that the whole world ought to in some way be persuaded and even coerced into a single political unit. The EU was not far along at the time of Krauthammer's writing, but is much further along now. The EU is among the least democratic bodies in the world, with decisions made in Brussels by the European Commission that are then forced upon member states, while the European Parliament, useless European Parliament, sits toothlessly on the sidelines. More specifically, it is a liberal empire. More specifically, it is a leftist empire with a huge dollop of the sexual revolution. And note how comprehensive it is. Again, Yoram Hazony puts it this way: having been initiated into this liberal paradigm, educated men and women can now find employment within a vast array of projects that assume a liberal construction of the world is coming. Think USAID, funding all these people all over the world to impose the sexual revolution. The political program of European unification, the expansion of unfettered free trade, and the free immigration of populations, the transitioning of business enterprises into multinational corporations that serve the global economy rather than any particular national interest, the subjugation of nations to an ever-expanding body of international law, the agitation for a universal regime of human rights through NGOs, UN bodies, and international courts, the homogenization of the world's universities by way of a system of international standards and peer review. Yoram Hazony, unquote. But he goes on. Much like the pharaohs and the Babylonian kings and the Roman emperors, as well as the Marxists of the last century, liberals too have their grand theory about how they're going to bring peace and economic prosperity to the world by pulling down all the borders and uniting mankind under their universal rule. Infatuated with the clarity and intellectual rigor of this vision, they disdain the laborious process of consulting with the multitude of nations they believe should embrace their view of what is right. This is what we see at the UN. And like other imperialists, they are quick to express disgust. You see this at the UN a lot. Contempt, you see it here. And anger when their vision of peace and prosperity meets with opposition from those who they are sure would benefit immensely by simply submitting. They may bicker about ways and means, but modern liberal imperialists are agreed. They wish to see the world in which liberal principles are codified as universal law and imposed on nations, if necessary, by force. This is what will bring universal peace and prosperity, unquote. Do you see how comprehensive this is? Does any of this sound familiar to you? And the question becomes, where is it left for citizens and leaders of nations who may disagree with the liberal project? Well, nowhere. for, quote, under a universal political order in which a single standard of right is to be held in force everywhere, tolerance for diverse political and religious standpoints must necessarily decline. This is Pizzoni again. Western elites whose views are now being aggressively homogenized in conformity with the new liberal construction are finding it increasingly difficult to recognize a need for the kind of toleration of divergent standpoints that the principle of national self-determination had once rendered axiomatic. Tolerance, like nationalism, is becoming a relic of a bygone era. Think of those ladies who were silently praying in front of abortion clinics, who were then hauled off to the Hooskow in Great Britain. In our own work at the United Nations, we are held in disdain. They have tried over the years to keep us out. I mean, it's very funny. It's like there'll be a negotiation and my guys will go in and you can feel the air go right out of the room. Go, oh, not those guys again. Because not only do we help governments negotiate, but we also report on what we see. And they do not like that. They hate that. They now call us anti-rights groups that have no right to be in the building. We're in the building almost every day. It should be noted that no multinational empire has ever been governed as a democracy. And so I urge UN delegates, especially those from the developing world, to consider what the stakes truly are in UN debates. I urge them to consider another and better way, the way of national sovereignty, and even the way of nationalism. Now, we must admit that nationalism has a bad name because of those Germans at mid-century. But it should be understood that primarily Hitler was an emperor seeking to subjugate at least all of Europe and indeed the whole world to a 1,000-year Reich. Nazism in World War II condemns not nationalism, but empire. Nationalism, properly understood, in fact, has a rich and mostly positive history. It is when countries are free and independent and there is competition among these free states that great surges of creativity and productivity have occurred. Pizzoni points us to ancient Greece, the Italian city-states of the Renaissance. Think of Western Europe after the treaties of Westphalia and what Pizzoni calls the, quote, unparalleled degree of experiment and innovation in government, economics, science, religion, and art. He says nationalism has been embraced by both liberals and conservatives, including revered figures such as Woodrow Wilson, Theodore Roosevelt, Mahatma Gandhi, Charles de Gaulle, and Margaret Thatcher. Consider what a nation is properly understood. It is a grouping of peoples who share a common culture, heritage, traditions, religion, language, and who have a history of joint action in the face of adversity. It is the gradual cohesion of families, clans, tribes, where a national state can leverage these bonds of mutual loyalty to get individuals to obey the laws, to serve in the military, and pay taxes, even when their own party or tribe is out of power and the government's policies are not to their liking. We see this breaking down today. Nationalism, properly understood, is a principled standpoint that regards the world as governed best when nations are able to chart their own independent course, cultivating their own traditions and pursuing their own interests without interference. This is opposed to imperialism, which seeks to bring peace and prosperity to the world by uniting mankind as much as possible under a single political regime. Consider also that we are seeing the rise of new responsible nationalism. We see the people of Great Britain, through their Brexit vote, deciding to leave the empire. We see the governments of Poland and Hungary resisting the orders of their European masters. We see it in the rise of Donald Trump. Empire is not inevitable. Losing national sovereignty is not inevitable. It will only happen if we let it. Note also the panic of the imperialists. They use terms like racist, white nationalists, even fascists for these natural inclinations to protect national sovereignty. National leaders have the absolute need to protect their people, to defend their nations from what is indisputably an empire. Consider this. Right at this moment, men and women are sitting in quiet and carpeted rooms at the UN and in Brussels who think they have the right to tell us how to live our lives. They believe that they have the right to tell people all over the world, all over the globe, how to live their lives, how to live their intimate lives. But they do not know us, and man, do they not care. But they are confident that they have certain universal principles that apply to everyone in the world and everyone throughout time. If someone believes this, and they also have the levers of power, they become very dangerous to those whose traditions, heritage, religion point in another direction. Do not think for 1 minute The empire won't coerce. They can, they do, and they will. There is an empire that is well advanced, and we owe it to our respective independent nations to resist. Even more, I would argue, we owe it to our ancestors, our children and grandchildren, and their children, and their children.
Thank you so much, Mr. Ruse, for being here today. I know that I speak for my fellow interns when I say how grateful we are to be able to go to the UN with CFAM. Earlier last week, it was incredibly eye-opening, and so I find this talk even more so. If we would like any questions from Mr. Ruse, please line up behind me. I have the microphone here. We ask that you keep questions brief and in the form of a question. Whenever you're ready.
Bring it on. Did I see the ambassador from Burundi holding one of somebody's hand, interns? It was so cute. They went in to meet the Burundi ambassador, and he was holding their hands. It was like so charming. And you guys loved him, right? Did you guys like him? Yeah. Yes, sir.
Hi. Is it on? Okay. Yeah. A number of years ago, I had an interaction with the United Nations treaty, or whatever the proper word is, on the rights of children.
Mm-hmm.
And my impression of it was, and tell me if this is accurate, my impression of it was that the purpose of the treaty was to disassemble the unitary family, to have the children, that is, that the parents just have no rights over the children, and the treatment of values and so forth comes from various government agencies rather than from the parents. Is that accurate, or how accurate is that?
You hit it. That is the fundamental problem with that treaty, is that it makes children independent rights-bearing creatures separate from their parents. So that's the fundamental problem with that. So yeah, you hit it right on the head. And we use our power to force these governments to accept these treaties, and we force them to accept the interpretation of treaty monitoring bodies, which have no force. You know, it's like the treaty monitoring body of the Convention on the Rights of the Child, telling the Holy See that the Catholic Church had to change its teaching on abortion and contraception. I mean, what? You know, in order to be, sadly, the Holy See signed that treaty, ratified that treaty. It's one of the only of those human rights treaties that the Holy See has signed or ratified. So yeah, you hit the nail right on the head. Please.
Thank you so much for being here. My name's Anne. I'm an intern.
He was holding your hand.
Yes, he was.
In the group picture.
Big red suit. I'm very spottable. Yes. I have a very simple question. Obviously, your family is very important to you. I wanted to know your favorite part about being a girl dad.
Well, it's all the conversation about fashion and makeup. And then we never get to talk about sports. That's a really good question. I can't imagine anything else. Well, okay. I at my advanced age, I think that if we'd had boys, I would be dead now. So maybe that, the sort of the low impact of girls is really good for me. And these two girls, Lucy and let me finish the story that I told you earlier. It was like, how old were you when Lucy was born? You don't want to say. She was really old. And then 4 years older, along comes Gigi. And, because of Gianna Mola, we named her Gianna Marie. So, yeah, these two girls have been just amazing. So, Lulu. Yes.
Hello, Mr. Ruse. I was wondering, since you mentioned that you work with Nicaragua, I was wondering what your other allies for CFAM are, and maybe if you're comfortable, what some of your adversaries are.
I'm not going to tell you who our allies are. Many years ago, George Weigel, whom you all know, writer, he said, when are you going to get a better class of friends? Because we work with, a lot of, Iran has been good on the life issues of the UN. Saudi Arabia has been good. Russia has been good. Belarus has been good. Who's been bad? France, Germany, Great Britain. All of our so-called allies are terrible on these issues at the UN. It's the weirdest thing. I mean, it's not the weirdest thing. We understand. Now, all those countries that I said we work with, they're not the same as us, even on these issues. I mean, they're not, right-wing pro-lifers. They mostly don't like the idea of radical feminists telling them what to do, which is kind of what the UN is. So yeah, I mean, and it comes and goes. We had very close relationships with a number of countries in Latin America, but that has kind of gone away. We had very good relationships with Central American countries, but that's kind of gone away. Hungary, for instance, is terrible on our issues at the UN. They have spent a couple of decades and millions of dollars to convince American conservatives that they're one of us. And, in a lot of ways they are in their domestic policy. But at the United Nations, they are no different than Germany. They're no different than France on the life issues, on the LGBT issues, Hungary and Poland also. We cannot break the EU consensus. So our recent crop of good, brave friends are the Africans. And these people need money terribly. They're desperately poor, yet they're willing to stand up to the European Union. It's astonishing. I mean, how poor is Burundi? I haven't looked, but you guys met with Burundi. This guy stands toe to toe with the powers of the earth and says no. I mean, it's really moving to see this happen. Anyway, yes.
Mr. Ruse, thank you so much for being here. Your talk was amazing. I'm an intern this summer here at the Luce Center. My name is Anastasia. And at the beginning of your speech...
Your aunt knows me. Is that right? No, it's your aunt knows me. Okay, from New York in the 80s or something. Anyway, go ahead.
At the beginning of your speech, something that you mentioned was John Paul II's call to action that you and many others responded to. And while we were visiting the UN, something that was brought to our attention, that we in the United States feel that we have everything. And so we don't need to do anything. We don't need to hear those calls to action. But I wanted to know, obviously there are many countries out there who don't have power to resist when, food is at risk, or money for supplies that they don't have is at risk. So how can you, what would be your advice for us as the United States who already have it all? How can we hear those calls to action and respond to them?
Well, one of the things I say to people when I travel around the country talking about our work, people say, what can I do? Like that. Your question is a good one. And I used to say, if you want to come to the UN, come and we'll show you what to do and you can work with us. But for the most part, you should stay home and take over the school board. And this was long before all of this was going on. And then one day my wife came to me and said, can I run for the school board? And I said, no. That was an ask. So yeah, if you're called to work at the, in a talk that I give called No Finer Time to Be a Faithful Catholic, this applies also to all Christians. We live in the most target-rich environment the world has ever known. There are halos hanging from the lowest branches of the trees. You can do anything on any issue that you want, and you're going to make the world a better place. You know what I mean? It's like, and not everybody can, charge the sniper's nest like I do. I mean, I'm never going to be able to get a job in business. Have you seen my Wikipedia page? It's terrible, isn't it? My organization is on the hate list of the Southern Poverty Law Center. So, it's like, I'm kind of cooked. This is, and so maybe you can't charge the sniper's nest like I do, but there's so many things you can do. You can write checks, right, Kimberly? You can go down to the school board and shake hands with the people that are doing the right thing. It means so much. If you feel called to work on the life issues, there's so much to do. The marriage issue, so much to do. It's like no matter where you turn, there's something for you to do. And if you want to come to the UN, we'd be happy to have you.
Hi, my name is Daniela. I'm an intern here. I haven't met you yet. I'm from New York City, and
in the West 30s, East 30s, right?
Yes,
yeah.
East 30s. And when we were there was this young woman talking about how she believes that fearless is a misogynistic word. And I wanted to know what your thoughts are about people making words or just phrases seem something very negative that are just not, and what your thoughts are about just the lies that they spread.
You know, it is like stepping through the looking glass at the United Nations, and you experience that. You sat in on the gender debates, right, of the high-level political forum. Yeah, you know, it's hard to imagine that they believe what they believe. But you know what I think? That we need to give them the courtesy of believing that they believe what they believe. You know what I mean? It's like it just seems so crazy. How could they believe this? But I think we owe it to them to accept that they really do believe these things. So what do? I mean, what we do is we help UN delegates understand what the words really mean. We help UN delegates negotiate documents so that the meanings are very clear. You know, I mean, we helped negotiate this, you know, the International Criminal Court document that has a really good definition of gender. There was a huge debate at the International Criminal Court negotiations over something called forced pregnancy, which they wanted to put in the document. And we fought like the dickens to make sure that it meant repeated rape in wartime to change the ethnic composition of the country rather than undefined so they could call it abortion. So, I mean, that's what we do, you know, and that's open to everybody, you know. Anytime anybody asks you to, we've done these drills with our daughters. What do you do when they ask you for your pronouns? You know what I mean? It's like, and we've come up with a number of, what did we find? I don't remember the best one. You know, but it's basically asking you to deny your faith, you know, because God created man and woman, you know, and so we're not going to play your silly games. So it's like, even in your own life, you know, you just tell them it's a religious ideology and it's against my religion. It's against my religion. You know, and you know, in the case of children, where they ask children to have their pronouns in school or recite pronouns, it's asking them, it's forcing religious speech on them. You know what I mean? It's a violation of the Establishment Clause of the First Amendment of the Constitution, especially when it happens at a public school. So there's so much you can do, even pushing back a little bit. But, you know, always stay strong. You know, you guys are so strong. You're very impressive. You know what to do. Yes, sir.
Recently, we've had President Trump defunding a lot of governments, government organizations, and NGOs. Do you think President Trump will remove funding for the UN?
First of all, I want to say that I'm so happy that your mother is here, Julie Gunlock, and that this is not tomorrow's not a work day. Julie has to get up at like 3:30 in the morning to go to work. So this would not have been possible except that it's on a Friday night, right? So I'm glad you're here. We are the largest single funder of the United Nations. I think 28% of the general budget that does not include the military, the UN military. No, I don't think that he will. But he is defunding a lot of what's going on at the United Nations, and he's pulling out of certain things. You know, quite frankly, we are a little bit unhappy that he's pulled out of so many things, because that means they're not in the room. Because when they're in the room, it makes so much difference, especially if they're on our side. And we know for a fact that the next, you know, left-wing president is going to rejoin all the things that he's pulled out of. So there's limited use. You know, when they're in the room, let me just tell you something. In Trump 1, it took us, because of the deep state, it took us 3 years to get the administration to take the right negotiating position on reproductive health in the UN. 3 years, and then they were gone. Trump 2 starts January 20th. 2 weeks later, there was a meeting of the executive board of UNICEF. And at that meeting, the Trump person initiated an amendment to have UNICEF cancel all DEI programs. That's how locked and loaded they were. This is an obscure meeting, and they were there 2 weeks after the inauguration. A week later was the executive board meeting of UN Women, and they did it again. So it's just phenomenal what they have done. On the other hand, they've pulled out of something called the Universal Periodic Review, which is where governments get together and criticize each other on human rights. That's a mistake, I think, because they need to be there to defend the United States and also to defend others who come under attack. One of the very interesting things about the Universal Periodic Review is where governments talk to each other, and the treaty monitoring bodies, which is when nasty NGOs talk to governments. The nasty NGOs that talk to governments in the treaty monitoring process only want to talk about abortion and LGBT. When the governments get together, they hardly talk about it at all. And the government that talks most about it, you guys will never believe, never guess the government who talks about these radical sexual revolution ideas. Iceland. Why? I don't know. I don't know, but it's Iceland. Like 21% of all comments in the Universal Periodic Review on abortion come from Iceland. You know, and remember that Iceland a few years ago announced that they had cured Down syndrome, you know, because now they have 100% abortion of Down syndrome children. Anyway, I don't think he's not gonna defund the UN, but yeah, it's complicated. How's that for a lame answer? It's complicated.
When we met with the ambassador of Burundi, I remember that he told us that he has been able with his country to deny much of the ideological aid because you keep your money, we'll keep our dignity, he said. So thank you so much for allowing us to receive that inspiration from him. And thank you again for being here today.
You want me out of here?
You can stop it. Austin, thank you so much for that. That was absolutely fantastic. And we're just so honored and grateful for all you do for the conservative movement and what you have done for cheese fries. So thank you so much. Now we have a fun little tradition here at the center. After we host a speaker, we love to gift you with a mug. It's a custom Grizzly mug that we have recently partnered with. The front, it has our logo, and on the back, it's one of our favorite quotes that Claire Booth Luce has said. It is, "Courage is the ladder on which all the other virtues mount." So here you go.
And it's not a Yeti.
Now, thank you all so much for being here today. We're hoping you enjoy this evening. Please join us out in the lobby for more fellowship, as well as Austin Ruse has 2 of his books out there for signing and for purchase. Actually, 3. So yes, definitely go check that out. And thank you guys again so much for being here.